Hey there, welcome to the Posit Data Science Hangout. I'm Libby Heron, and this is a recording of our weekly community call that happens every Thursday at 12 p.m. US Eastern Time. If you are not joining us live, you miss out on the amazing chat that's going on. So find the link in the description where you can add our call to your calendar and come hang out with the most supportive, friendly, and funny data community you'll ever experience. Can't wait to see you there. I will say we are done with our housekeeping and we can go ahead and introduce our featured leader today, Samia Baig, Senior Data Scientist slash Data Engineer at Johnson & Johnson Innovative Medicine. Samia, would you like to introduce yourself? Tell us a little bit about what you do at J&J Innovative Medicine and also something you like to do for fun.
All right. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining. This is actually my first hangout, and also, my first time speaking. So looking forward, I've been a part of the R community now for 8 years, so I know that this is a fun community, and I'm happy to be here. As Libby said, I work as a senior data scientist at J&J. I've been here for 2 years, but I have overall 8 years of experience in different areas of healthcare and public health. But what I've done, I would say, like throughout my career, has been, even though technically I am a data scientist by title, I kind of am more a little bit, I would say, a product or analytics engineer. So I sit in between, like pure engineering team and then the business. And really, like what my work has been throughout the last 8 years. It kind of didn't start that way. I was, started more in the clinical research space, but um, basically I, heavily focus on making, raw data ready for analysis. And then earlier in my career, I also was just working from like the whole like end to end, preparing the data and, developing like the end output needed for, whoever needed the end product. But right now, currently in my role, I focus almost entirely on just like the data, like, making the data, like ready for either a dashboard or a similar interactive product. I will be actually kind of shifting gears now to prepare data more for like ML AI use cases. Yeah, I think the principles have been overall the same. It's just like, really just understanding the business context of the data and then also applying the technical skills and the right ones for the, right use or, the right audience to just, like streamline the process and automate when needed. And then yeah, just I guess coming up with creative solutions to make data easily digestible for a wide audience.
Amazing. And I saw Rob say in the chat, he said, I feel like analytics engineer is a better descriptor
Mhm.
for other titles surprisingly often. Do you feel like that's a good descriptor for what you do, like analytics engineering, that underside stuff? I always need more context in engineering. I feel like it's a big blind spot for me. I am always so much on the modeling or the end user side of it.
Yeah, analytics engineering, I think, is an appropriate way to describe it. I know that, like, within data engineering, there's a lot of like, discussion on how to actually name the titles or like, if we
Yeah.
all fall under data engineer. But I think within it, there's different stratifications and roles. So yeah, I would definitely say that mine aligns more with analytics engineer. But again, like more so recently, has been like where I've had that specific title because before I was, working more in biostatistics or and like data science in public health. So in that, I was just kind of like, either one person or one of the few people on a team kind of, we were doing a little bit of everything. Um, yeah, so I think it's just been like, different kinds of roles throughout, but I would say overall, like, yeah, analytics engineer describes pretty well like what I'm doing now and what I focused on a lot throughout my career.
Wanted to ask you a little bit about your background, your education, and kind of how you got to where you are. Were you much more focused on the subject matter and sort of found yourself in the data space doing data type things over time? Or was data something that you were focusing on even when you were in school on a really, regular basis?
Yeah, that's a great question. So actually, I'm a pharmacist by training. I do get a lot of questions about that. I went to a 6-year pharmacy program, so that was
Oh,
like pretty
wow.
much right after high school. And so I think it was a pretty big, like, it felt like I knew I wanted to work in healthcare. And I knew that whatever I wanted to focus on was, related to like clinical sciences. What exactly I wanted to do, that's a hard decision to make when you're a high school student. But I got into the program and I knew that I really enjoyed like the clinical knowledge and aspects of what I learned there, but I wanted to learn more skills because I knew that healthcare, there's just so many things, but like, I think sometimes when you're going through like an accelerated program like that, like you don't have, too much time to explore a little bit like the different career paths. So what I did was that after I graduated, I went to did my master's of public health specifically focusing on epidemiology and biostatistics. So in public health, that is more of like the quantitative analytical skill sets. I kind of knew that I would go into the data direction. And I was just trying to learn more skills because I wanted to see like, I just kind of wanted to diversify like, all of what I could learn to see like how that can synthesize together and, like how I can apply that in healthcare. So before I went into my public health program, I was trying to learn how to code. But I think something I realized later that when I first just was trying to learn to code, I was learning to code before I was learning to think programmatically, which I do think there's a distinction between that. Because I think initially, like, I didn't understand when I was first starting out, like, like, why am I, like, telling, the command line to make a directory when I can just do that with the user interface? Like, I never really understood why I was doing things writing code. Until later, much later in my career. So like in public health school, I was much more focused on statistics and I thought I would become, a clinical scientist or, someone who was doing more research. And then when I started my career, and I think this is something I do hear a lot in like any kind of like academic or research background, is that when you go into the real world, the data is not nothing like it was in the classroom because it's like very chaotic in a way that you could never anticipate. I mean, there's just so many different things I've seen with like different data sources. And a lot of my time, really went into preparing and making it ready for analysis. And then there were so many skills that I didn't realize after in my career that were not as much emphasized, I think, in school because school focused more on like, the more methodology and the statistical analysis, which definitely has its place. But I think the real world, you definitely see like more important aspects of like, version control, documentation, making your processes like reproducible, and scalable. And that's really where when I had mentioned that when I had first started to learn to code, I was just learning to code, learning to type syntax, but not realizing what it meant to be programmatic. And I think that's kind of something I think about, especially in like this, like new AI age where we're like thinking about like, oh, like, is coding going to be, as useful or not by hand. But I think really like the main thing that stays is that really thinking of like okay, like how do I design my pipeline so that I'm not like doing the same thing again and again? How, do I like make sure that like when I'm, starting out a project that I'm like, initializing it with the Git repository or like, why is that even important? And I think really like my 8 years of experience has been just learning that and also learning that in different settings. So even though I was within like, the healthcare, overall healthcare domain area, I've worked in academia, a hospital pharmacy, public health department, and now currently in pharma. And there was this tweet I think I read once that said that like, sometimes when you start a new job, it's almost like starting like a new season. Like if your life was like a TV show, it's like starting like a new season. And even though I work within the healthcare realm, I definitely felt that because like all the problems, all the data, they're all just, different from each other. And that by itself is like a learning process. So really, yeah, I mean, I think that's really how I got I would say that I kind of started with data in mind, but I didn't really think that this would be the direction my career was going in until I started, working. And I think even with the years of experience I have now, I mean, there's always like, trying to figure out like, is this where I want to be, or like, like what are other aspects of data that I can learn? Because there's a lot of like, niche areas within data as a broad field. So I think there's always a lot to learn.
There
And as
is.
time goes, yeah.
It's so validating hearing you say that first principles were really important because as a person who teaches other people to code, it's so difficult to say like, oh, well, just keep doing it and keep being messy and keep making mistakes because over the course of the next 3 years, you're really going to understand why this or that is valuable. I really think that that time is needed to understand why those things are important. You can't skip through and just understand intuitively why it's important to use version control until you've maybe messed up several times and not used version control. And that giving yourself the space to spend that time is really important. So it's wonderful hearing you say that. And I see some things in the chat too that are very complimentary. Grace says, love your thoughts on this. Started teaching reproducible workflows and version control in first year at UBC, but personally didn't learn that until my PhD. That is very valid and common, I think. And as an aside, I know that you said you had worked in Department of Health. That was New York City, right? You worked in the New York City Department of Health.
Mhm.
And I think we had a question. Let me see here. We did. We had a question that was an anonymous one that said, what was it like in that move that you made from public health to pharma? Um, and maybe that could also include what did that job search process look like? And did all of your experience transfer really well? But you were already a certified pharmacist by that point.
Yeah, so I think the thing is like when I was so I did feel that when I was going into public health, especially working in the Department of Health, that besides my pharmacy background, having like, the public health skill set was important because in pharmacy, we learn at very high level, like, the clinical research skills, but it was in my public health program that I learned much more like the nuance, like epidemiology and biostatistics courses. So, and I felt that a lot of like, in the public health job descriptions, that was highly emphasized to like, have like a very specific public health background. But there's a lot of jobs within the health department. And, I mean, I think like as like new administrations come, there are like new priorities. So that always, I think, also influences the type of jobs that are available at any given time. And also, I think the Department of Health has evolved to like, after I left, they also have started, I think, more of like a data science group within or like a data science team. And I worked specifically more under a healthcare policy team. So it wasn't like specific to data science, but we had a team of people who were data scientists as well as PhD scientists, and we were all kind of working on the research and evaluation aspect. So I think just like preparing for, and I would say that the transition from public health to pharma, there were similarities and differences. I mean, I think the similarities were really like, really just being able to work with different data sources within the healthcare domain and understanding, the stakeholder who needs that data and then understanding, just the process and, making a data set that's like, some of the data were like, like survey data, some of it was our own internal data, and really just trying to understand the ins and outs of like, what's needed to, get the data readily available for the person who needs it. I think that's a skill that transferred, in between all of my jobs. But I think it was like the overall domain knowledge of just like, healthcare and public health helped me, get my job in the Department of Health, and then pharma as well. But pharma definitely is very different. And I think it's also like when I say pharma, I'm not speaking for every single team, obviously in my organization or, other pharma companies, because I think like, it's just a very huge workplace. And I think there's, definitely different teams, who may be doing different things that I don't have full visibility about. But, I think, I specifically work more on like a data science team, which is a large team. And, all of us are data scientists, but I think a lot of people come from different and diverse backgrounds. So similarly, like, I came from a pharmacy background with a public health degree, but then, you do see some people who are more, who have a technical background, came from like, data science or, people who had more of like the scientific background. So I think it's just that the type of data I use is really different. The type of questions I'm answering is very different, more so related to specific treatment or therapeutic areas, whereas in public health, it was more broadly like looking at programs and initiatives within the city, still within the healthcare domain, but we were just, answering a different question or like doing something differently because it was more like, I guess, public programming.
Right.
But yeah, like, I mean, I would say that there's both an overlap, but then I think maybe the differences just come in like the type of work.
Perfect. I mean, that goes for all kinds of differences between industries and jobs too. Well, thank
Mm.
you, Anonymous Asker, for asking that question. And we have a whole bunch of questions in Slido now, so let's go get to them. Noor, I saw you had asked a question. Would you be willing to unmute and ask that one live?
Hello, can people hear me?
Yep.
Awesome. Okay. Hi, my name's Noor. Um, for Samia, and forgive me if I'm messing up your name, is Samia correct?
Yeah, so yeah, that's correct. Yeah.
Okay. As someone who works in both the data science and data engineering spaces, what do you say are distinguishing factors in the responsibilities of said roles? Because I know
Mhm.
that often sometimes there's like some opaqueness between them, as well as what would you say is unique to, I guess, J&J as a data scientist or data engineer?
Sure. So I think that even though like my title is data scientist, and then like, in the past I was working as a data scientist, and then like sometimes it'll be more like my title was like data analyst when I started my career. I definitely feel like in healthcare, especially when I started my career, because um I think in the beginning there weren't as many distinctions between like data scientist and data engineer. I feel like more so recently within the last maybe like 5 years, I'm seeing much more of that difference. I think just because data scientists were doing kind of all of that work. But I think the thing is that technically speaking, I think data scientists are considered, the professionals who work specifically more on the modeling after the data engineering work has been completed. So data engineering, analytics engineering, technically speaking, is like an upstream responsibility. But I think like, and I am more so like, in my workplace, like an analytics engineer. But then again, like I said, I can't really speak like, for my entire organization because I don't know, like, in different teams, like if there's that distinction or not. But I think the thing is that in my past experiences, there weren't really like a distinction. And I think it also just depends on the company and like the setting of your role because like I mentioned earlier in my career, I was working more like, kind of like a solo data person. And in like, in the pharmacy setting, or in like Department of Health, I worked on a team. But then again, in academia, when I first started my career, I was working as kind of like a solo data person. So I think in that I wore many more hats. And I think it's just like the way any company's like kind of team is organized or like what specific project like data project they're working on, like how that team is organized. I think maybe just really probably um it's probably how those roles are assigned. So like, I mean, I think in a smaller organization, maybe like more of like a startup type. Also, like, probably like there's kind of one or two or few people who are wearing many hats, whereas like in a more larger and like robust organization on a bigger team, I think like, these role differentiating roles like data scientist, analytics engineer, product engineer, like they're a little bit more stratified. And yeah, I would say like, they work on different processes of like or different like time points of like, that whole end-to-end data process.
Thank you, Samia. That was a fantastic question, and I would love to follow it up with an anonymous question in Slido that's perfect for our about halfway point where we are here, because usually by this point, someone has asked this, and here it is. So it is, what are the most popular tools that you and your team use in your job at J&J? So languages, like, are you an R person, Python person? Do you all use SQL? Do you use transformation tools, data warehouses, cloud services, stuff like that? All that would be fantastic context.
Sure. So currently so I would say like the 2 years I've been here, I was using a lot more SQL than I ever did in my career, which is really good. I mean, I think that throughout like, my time in data, I've heard a lot, the emphasis about SQL being, continuing to be for in the long term, like a very, one of the most important you know, technically it's not programming language, but I mean, it's like, a language that I think really, is the mainstay for any kind of data work. Initially, it was a hard transition because I started my career almost exclusively working in R and Python. So it's a very different type of mindset. I kind of think of SQL being like, like those dolls which like kind of go into each other, like, like the little,
A nesting
I kind
doll?
of, yeah, so it's kind of like that's how I think of like using SQL. But I've been using that's been kind of my work because I work a lot more on as I mentioned, the analytics engineering side, and we use a data warehouse, and then I use SQL to combine data from different sources and make it ready for like a dashboard or similar tool. And sometimes I have used R and I do use Python time to time, and I think in my current job um, I would say I use Python a little bit more than R because I was developing more scripts or, programs to do like more data checks or, just like trying to automate like something, like that I needed to like get the data, ready or things like that. We use AWS currently at my job, but in the past, in the past I had used when I had used a lot more R, I was using a lot of different data sources, like survey data, electronic health record data, and like medical claims data, things like that. So that was like, and we also didn't really have like at that time didn't use AWS. It was a little bit more, I would say just kind of an arbitrary process to like, get the data, kind of ready, developing these like R. And I think that's really where R and Python, especially I use R a lot more, became important because it was really like, we were trying to pull data from like if it's like survey data or electronic health record data, different sources. And it was just, I think, a little bit more of like a programmatic way in which like, I get the data and then I'm like, trying to like, create like a Excel workbook out of that or create like a R markdown out of that. So at my job currently, I don't create the end product. So that's really where I think the SQL use becomes more important. Um, but yeah, I mean, I think those are the I would say like SQL, AWS are like the main tools I currently use, and then Python for just some like ancillary processes to like do QAs and things like that.
Perfect. Well, there was a question that is a nice little quick follow-up with this one, which was, what do you use SQL in? And I'm guessing that is like, what type of environment do you write SQL in? This question says, I've done some intro stuff, but I never run into much opportunity to use it in my day-to-day, and I want to get better so I can apply to more jobs requiring SQL.
Yeah, so I currently use AWS Redshift, and I think the free tool that you can use. I mean, I know that some people are using other tools, like more like open source tools,
Hmm.
but I can't really speak to that as much. The thing with SQL was that I understand that kind of conundrum of trying to get like because I think like I was just R and Python has a much more friendly open source environment. And like, I think just being an RStudio user, and eventually having it evolve into, Posit, I felt like there was more like, this one-stop shop. So I wasn't really using SQL as much to prepare, like, for like other roles in which SQL might be required. And so really I learned SQL. I would say that, if someone does have like a R Python background and then you're going into SQL, I mean, it is a different language, but I think that's enough to prepare you, to eventually use like SQL at the workplace. Because that's really where I would say like just doing SQL at my job was where I became really good at it, because like, I would see exactly the complexities of the problems and things where
Right.
then, I could think through it. Because sometimes I think when trying, that's also another thing, like, when trying to learn something in your own time, you're given these like practice problems, and they're fine for like, the introduction, but they don't necessarily, I think, they're not going to be as complex as you see in the real world. And there, you definitely will. I mean, like I think that kind of concern that like I'm not going to know enough. I think if you already know a language, like that gap is usually filled, and it's just kind of a matter of like a different syntax, and then also maybe just like learning like one thing with SQL is also just learning like that, like CTEs or the subquery nesting, because that's what makes it, different from like the Python and R mindset. But I think like as long as you still have that same principle of, analyzing data, I think that learning curve shouldn't be as big.
Perfect. Yeah. And also, there are lots of people in the chat chatting about where they use SQL and how they use it. Thank you, everybody, for sharing your resources. I learned SQL in SQLite 3. I learned almost everything in a really like console heavy way, not a lot of UIs. And then when I got into my first data job and needed to use a UI, I was like, oh no, what's going on? I just want a console. So I think it's good to get exposure to many different ways of using SQL, many different sort of like applications. There are lots of people saying DuckDB is good. And then
Mhm.
I know that there are also extensions in VS Code and Positron. So go check some stuff out. And let's hop over to Slido once again, where we had a great question. It was anonymous. I will put it in the chat here. And it says, one of the issues I'm having is convincing my team to make the data pipeline more robust. They are more content to leave it and then work through the panic when it fails. How would you go about convincing them of the need for a more robust pipeline?
Sure. So I completely understand, like, and I think what happens is, my understanding is the reason this happens is that I think, um, sometimes like you'll get projects and then you want to get them out really quickly. And then, you want to make sure you have something to show. And then like, with however the pipeline is. Yeah, because I think the thing is sometimes making a pipeline more robust is requires some upfront time. And I think it's really just trying to make people understand like that, I would say like maybe like that balance between how much time should that take, and then like, what's kind of how would that kind of improve the end result? Because I think sometimes what happens is like in the moment, trying to get things out quickly, just using whatever we have, trying not to fix the upstream processes, is something that is very, I would say, like typical in like, a lot of data science environments, at least like what I've seen. So I think the thing is like I don't have like a very, I would say, concrete answer to this. But I think really it's just um kind of starting kind of I think like being able, like if you've already identified that, is like identifying kind of small but powerful places where you can fix things. Something that's like maybe not as time intensive, but then that can like really have an impact on making things, better for the long run. Um, I think some things are, for example, like if there's not enough documentation, or like, you see like a documentation gap, to like really try to like, fill that. I personally feel like also in SQL, because I use that primarily at my workplace, is to really, especially if you have like much more complex processes, is to really find a way to make um the SQL easier to navigate. So like I'm a very huge advocate for just using CTEs and not multiple nested subqueries. And I mean, in the whole grand scheme of like, making a more robust pipeline, that probably sounds like a small minor thing. But it actually makes a huge difference because down the line, if someone needs to like, someone else needs to own the code, someone needs to read it or make like a fix to it, it's very, very difficult to debug, like, So I think like those are just examples that, like I have seen that I can speak to. I don't know if that answers maybe like a specific aspect of like, like in terms of like pipelines, because I think also like different companies have different processes of like, how they develop the pipeline in the first place. So I think like it would be hard to completely like, and especially if you work in a bigger company to like totally do the redesign because there's so many people involved in it. But I think just thinking of what you can do in your role is really trying to find ways to really like um, reduce anything you can in which would make add more maybe technical debt in the long run or make, the process harder for like, like if you need to transition it or if you need to have other people work on it. I think just kind of identifying like small areas and being able to tackle those.
Awesome. Thank you. And I saw somebody had commented on there, can you define robust? And maybe you can speak to this a little bit, but I think that I define robust in a data pipeline as hard to break. And if it does break, easy to figure out what broke so you can fix it. So having logs, and then also just making sure that at least some things are automated so that there's not this process where like it's waiting for a person to go in and do something all the time. What do you think, Samia?
Yeah, I definitely agree. I mean, I think that's like, I think like just making it so that it's like difficult, like, I think like I gave in the SQL example, like, the more you write a very complex query that only you can understand, the more difficult it is for, like debugging down the line. And I think like that's at a very high level. Like I do feel like that's how I got into like R and Python to begin with, because, a lot of processes when I started were like in SAS or were very fragmented. Like they were like between SAS and then copying and pasting SQL and things like that. And so I think like another thing is that like what you said, Libby, like just trying to identify ways in which you have to minimize like someone going in the code and changing lines or someone
Right.
having to do something. And I think like really like in programming, like using like a language like R and Python, like I think you can, use more, there's more an opportunity to use placeholders or like variables that can, replace like the dates or like replace
Right.
like the names of like, because like you'll be basically able to reuse that. So I think just like having that principle of like reusability and scalability in mind. In
Just like
terms
data
of, yeah,
science, where you're
exactly.
like,
Yeah.
I'm going to write a function for this instead of going in and changing my hard coded values 50 times.
Right, right. Yeah,
We're
yeah.
going to make this parameterized, right?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. I want to hop over to Amelia's question. She has an asterisk next to her name, so I'm going to ask the question for Amelia. It says, I think the distinction you make between thinking programmatically versus coding is so important. Getting past that, I could just make a folder with the GUI with the GUI. Why would I use code? Mindset is a challenge when teaching. Do you happen to have any specific resources or strategies or examples that might help students or others with that mindset?
That's a great question. And it's interesting to think about. Yeah, I think so I think maybe I'm trying to think a little bit.
Some of the best
Yeah,
examples are just like, here's what I used to do, and here's the years of experience that taught me why that was so important.
right. I think the thing is like maybe an example you could do is like write a script which like has to be developed every month or something like and like some kind of cadence, right? So like it's like developed like every like maybe like if especially if you're teaching a class, like maybe have a week where they have to like write a script that like runs every day. Because I think the thing is then like, and then like that script should be saved in a specific folder with the name that distinguishes the date, something like that. Because I think like when I was initially learning, particularly in like statistics, classes, the idea was that we're just writing these scripts to like, run like, for specific analyses. Once, we get the analyses done, the paper we publish and everything's great. But reality is that, like that same analyses will be run multiple times. And also, I mean, that depends on like, if you're working in academia versus like more of a practice setting, like public health. But like, a lot of times, like, a lot of scripts need to be run like maybe like periodically, or maybe like, I need to, even if it's not like, on a cadence, like, I need to run this like in a couple of months. When I'm asked, I just should be able to, press that, or just like, basically be able to, yeah, like open R, run that script and then get the output. And that's kind of it. So I think maybe like in terms of teaching is like kind of developing like an automated pipeline, like creating a report. Like I would say like the first start with the basics, like creating the report, making sure the report or whatever analyses does what you want it to. And then the last part is really like, trying to like maybe use like task scheduler or cron to like run that report every day and have it sent to your email or have it saved to like a folder. And then I think that will really enforce like why, those skills are really important in a lot of places. Because I think a lot of people don't really see that aspect of like, these analyses usually are not one and done, but they're usually happening again and again. And, rather than me having to do the same thing again and again, where can I minimize that gap and just like, do it so that it kind of runs more or less on its own.
That's the dream, right? That's the
Mhm.
dream. I mean, I can think of four things that I've done in the past 6 months that I have thought, oh, I'm gonna have to do this again, but I don't have time to do it the right way this time, and I need to just do it. It's tough. Like, if anybody is out there going, oh, I would love to do that, but I don't have time to like make sure that I don't have technical debt later. I see
Mhm.
you. It's hard.
Mhm.
Thank you, Amelia, for that great question. The next question I wanted to direct to you was from Russ. Russ Conti, if you are available to ask that live, that would be great. And I will put your question in the chat as well.
Okay. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. Hey, great time. This is really, really good. Are there any non-data science skills that are very helpful in your either current or former job?
Yeah, non-data science skills are, I would say, I mean, I think maybe data science skills technically should include some non-data science skills because it's not just all
Yeah.
technical. I think like one like and those and sometimes I think it's hard to define those skills because like it's easy to say, hey, learn R, Python, or like, maybe like use Denny. I don't know. Like, I think it's much more easier to kind of point to a tool. Whereas like the soft skills are a little bit more abstract. Definitely, communication, but communication also is, I mean, a lot of people say communication, right? It's like just communication, but that looks differently, you have to kind of, I think, really understand your team, understand your stakeholders, and really kind of like put yourself in their shoes and think like, okay, what like, how are they thinking about this versus how am I thinking about this? And then really, I think with that understanding, it also forms like, good relationships, also just, maintaining a good communication channel to make sure that like, people are in the loop with whatever's going on. And also, I guess maybe not making assumptions like, oh, like this person's a non-technical person, they won't know. Like, I think really just like I said, like just totally understanding, what that person's understanding is and going off of that. And one like concrete example I'll just give, like in terms of like a technically non data science skill is that like a lot of people love dashboards, like, and I think maybe like people assume that everyone, when whatever I will produce should be a dashboard, but not everyone is used to that. Like, I mean, there's a lot of people who just like a color coded Excel sheet, a very like, maybe like a Word document or just something, that's just sent like in a small, like, HTML table. And I think it's really trying to understand what their needs are and what works for them, by just putting yourself in their shoes or seeing like, what processes they're used to or how they have throughout time really like been, intaking data insights and then being able to develop solutions based on that, I think is probably, I would say, one of the most important skills I've learned, yeah, throughout.
Wonderful. I just saw Nutobeko said technical empathy. What a great phrase. I love it. Okay. let's head on to the next question. Ross, thank you so much for asking that one. The next one is from Kevin. Kevin Snyder, if you are available to ask your question live, that would be great. And there's a follow-up to Kevin's, which is in a similar vein to what we were just talking about the ratio of pharma to data science knowledge that's expected of data scientists.
All right,
Let's see,
yeah.
do we have
Yeah,
Kevin?
thanks. Yep.
Hey,
All right, my video is not working, but I can
that's
ask.
okay.
Yeah, so my question is, and I guess it's not, I'll start with, trying to understand exactly what subject matter you reside in. Is it pharmacovigilance with epidemiology or kind of where you sit in the organization? But then beyond that, my question is really, is there any kind of community among data scientists across the whole company, right? Spanning potentially like discovery, CMC, non-clinical, clinical development, pharmacovigilance, just to what extent are you connected with other data scientists across the organization? And to what extent do you kind of have visibility into who's doing what? So because ideally, I think a lot of data science, in different contexts, you can learn from each other, even if you're working on different subject matter expertise.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. So I work in the data science and digital health team, and we work in research and development. So I work more on solutions for, different clinical trial stakeholders. But then, I also, will be down the line involved in projects which will kind of in the same vein, but just like different aspects of, that work. So I'm still learning, and, maybe like my answer to that question is also that I mean, like, I just don't know like completely all of like the different aspects of what's there, because I will also be getting involved in those different aspects. But I think one thing I have learned in working in pharma, it's been 2 years now since I've been at my current role, is that particularly J&J is a very big organization. There's a lot of data analytics in many different aspects that I can't really speak to and don't have full visibility, but I'm trying to learn, because I mean, sometimes I'll just see someone's like title or something pop up and I'll be like, hey, can we schedule a one-on-one? I'd love to learn more about what you're doing. And I think for me, that's really helpful to, just have more visibility, particularly as someone who started here, like, just a few years ago. But I mean, even when I worked in the Department of Health, like even though New York City Department of Health, it's just one city's department, there's like 6,000 plus employees, and then we're just one agency in like a broader scheme of other agencies. And the things I worked on were like I was a little siloed, from like other teams, and then it was sometimes just other teams who were just in a neighboring bureau or team who were doing very similar things, and I didn't always have full visibility on that. But I think the thing is that and now hopefully I'm answering this question correctly, but like, yeah, I mean, I think I do agree with like, because sometimes I believe that it's very collaborative. Like sometimes what happens in silos is that like there are people doing some similar things and then some different things. And it's always really good to know, like, all the different aspects of data that, even I don't like fully know, just because I've never been exposed to someone, working on a specific aspect. In the Department of Health, how I actually got really involved in knowing what other people are doing was I worked during the COVID-19 pandemic. And so in that situation, emergency situations, we got kind of regrouped into other data teams or other like, groups, and focusing more on responding to the pandemic rather than doing kind of our daily activities. So things like that, I think, helped a lot. And, like how I'm like bringing that back in my current role is just really like, every time we have these like periodic meetings, or even if we don't, just like kind of seeing if I just kind of see someone like, so like working on a specific area, like commercial or things like that, like I'll just reach out to them. But it's a little bit more up to me now to like, make that awareness. And I think maybe like from an organizational perspective, I mean, I think sometimes like there are initiatives like, to kind of do that, but I think still in large organizations, I notice that it's easier to get a little bit siloed, I think, just because of the volume of people working on different things.
Absolutely. Even, I mean, I work at Posit, which is a much, much smaller company, much, much smaller company than Johnson and Johnson. And it's really up to me to build my community as well, just because we're all doing such disparate things. Gonzalo had said in the chat, like making a community is not a spectator sport. You've got to take action. And I agree. I think it's really rare for companies to actually prioritize and have someone organize an internal community of practice, but nothing is stopping you from reaching out to a bunch of different people, including end users of your data products, and just getting to know them and shadowing them, finding out how they use, what their pain points are, stuff like that. It's just a lot of time and effort. Well, thank you so much for asking that question. And I wanted to hop over in our last 9 minutes that we have left here and ask Hubert to ask his question live. And then I will ask you a little bit of a career advice question, Samia. Hubert, are you available to ask live?
I am. I have to remember
Hey.
what I wrote.
Oh, well,
Okay.
I'm going to put it in the chat as well.
Yeah.
I did highlight it at the top of Slido.
Yeah. So what are your biggest data challenges that you have? I mean, you work in all these areas. You're in J&J, a very big organization. You know, you've got data that you work with all the time, and then data sort of several steps removed from, the things you deal with. So if you could speak to a little bit, what are the biggest data challenges you have? Is it internal versus external type data? And if you had a magic wand, what problem would you solve in that area?
That's my favorite part of that question. If you had a magic wand, what would you do?
That's a great question. Yeah, I think maybe I might have alluded to like or maybe someone else might have asked a little bit in terms of like, the pipeline robustness question. I think the thing is that sometimes like the issues with and not just specific to any company, but just overall is that, an idea comes, we want to do it quickly, let's just do what we can. Like it's almost like, I think we're just kind of like we're not the, focusing on the more upstream processes, but then just trying to leverage what we can downstream to get something out. And I think that it's kind of like sometimes what happens in data. I think that these can be a little bit like band-aid solutions, like we're just trying to get things out, but then we're not like, seeing like, if we fix that upstream problem that needs to be fixed, then this can, significantly reduce the time I spend on three different projects to, make that change within three different projects. Or like, if I just kind of like, think more, and it kind of just I would say goes back to like that mindset of, developing or um really developing our pipelines in a way which we can really just minimize all of the fixes happening way downstream. Because then like you will just keep on making these individualized solutions downstream when some of those solutions could definitely be like, fixed upstream, and then it could scale to multiple projects and we wouldn't in the long run be spending so much time doing that. And I would say maybe like that's a kind of thing, like, that's something I would love to maybe fix. I would say if I had a magic wand, if a magic wand can write documentation for me, that'd be amazing. Because documentation takes a lot of time. Like it's like one of those things which are kind of dry, but you know that like it's very important. And sometimes I enjoy documenting because it's almost like a teach back to me, like, oh, this is all I've done
Hmm.
and this is what it is. But it can be a very time consuming. So I think that if I had a magic wand to just document all the thoughts that in my head the exact way I wanted it to, just write that documentation. I would say I wish there was a easy way to do that. I know some people are using AI for that, but sometimes still you need to contextualize like exactly
Hmm.
like the thing. So I think with AI, like maybe, it would still be like a hybrid process and trying to, create documentation.
I agree. I love Santiago in the chat said magic wand equals voice transcription. And actually, that's a great point. If you are curious about people using voice transcription, I highly recommend joining the data science lab that's on like March 17th with Joey Marshall because he uses voice transcription and he's going to be using it the whole way through our process. So if you're curious about someone using it, definitely attend that pos.it/dslab. All right, with our last 5 minutes, I would like to ask you a career advice question. We are missing Rachel today, guys. If you have not noticed, Rachel's not here. I think she's in the air somewhere. So send your love to Rachel in the chat. Maybe we can show her the chat file after this. But Rachel, always make sure that we get a career advice question in. So, Samia, what is a piece of career advice that maybe you wish you could go back in time and give yourself, like a younger version of you when you were just getting started in data, or maybe leaving school, or something that you like to give to others?
Sure. In terms of career advice, so I think for me, the biggest thing was just like joining a community. I mean, I'm not like saying this just because I'm in a posit data science hangout, but I
Join
mean
this
like
one.
being for real though, because like I joined like I would say like a lot of my learning happened probably even outside of my work. And in the community. Like I joined Tidy Tuesday. That advice was
Yeah.
actually given to me by someone when I worked in my first job. Because we did have a small but mighty R user group at my workplace. And I think just joining more groups, like there's a really great, and I mean, I think everyone's already kind of there, but just like even like in person, if your city has one, those were really amazing. I met Rachel at the R user group when I was in Boston many years ago. So it's like I just really like, learn people, learn different things. I was a little, intimidated, and sometimes, I mean, I still am, even all these years, just like going to groups and being like, oh, these people know so much, and like, what do I like ask or what do I do? But I think the community, like, I do notice that a lot of people very much are on the same page, no matter what industries we work in, or if whether we're starting out or years into this, like more or less everyone's on the same page. But I do feel like, like joining these communities, and particularly not just joining like, something more that's like a talk session, but like I think Tidy Tuesday, when I was doing that every Tuesday, and then eventually I did like the 30-day map challenge. Um, it was a very excellent way, like really to just learn from other people. Like I started feeling like I'm okay at ggplot, and now feeling like really, really like excited and good, about like the work I've done. Just because like, just like other people shared their ideas, and then like, I also started to like, it kind of, helped me think about like, my own unique perspectives, and then really like, think creatively through our code, and things like that. And I think, even though that was more specific to data viz, but like it also just kind of helped, me get better at writing better code, writing some R packages in my own time, and really like, also just like re-emphasizing the importance of version control. So I do highly recommend for anyone who is like, interested in, open source languages to really try to join some of these like more practical, like projects, or like social community-based projects, because it really helped me get from a point where I was like, okay, I feel somewhat okay, but I could do more, to like more confident. And I think that definitely helps like, bridge some of that, bridge those skills. So yeah.
That's fantastic. And I 100% agree with that and want everybody to get involved in the community and share your work out loud. Thank you so much, Samia. And this is where I will plug again the data science lab, because we have so many things that have to do with what Samia just said coming up. March 10th, we're going to have John Harmon, who is the maintainer of the Tidy Tuesday GitHub repo. He's going to show us how to submit a Tidy Tuesday dataset, how to curate a Tidy Tuesday dataset, what happens behind the scenes of how, when they get submitted and curated, and how they end up on the Tidy Tuesday repo. And then the next week, we're going to have Joey Marshall, who's going to be live coding analysis of a Tidy Tuesday dataset, I think, using Claude Code. And this is the one where you'll see him use voice transcription. So if you're just curious about how other people work, you want to see some live coding, come join us at the Data Science Lab. That's where we share screens. There are no presentations, just like the Data Science Hangout, and it is always a good time. And we do all chat in Discord. So hop on the Discord server before you leave today. We are so glad that you hung out with us today. Samia, this was amazing. Thank you for coming. I hope you had a good time.
I had a really good time. Now, thank you everyone for the questions.
Amazing. And Samia, that means that we hope to see you back as an attendee. Everybody say thank you to Samia in the chat. Say hello to Rachel, and we miss you in the chat. And we will see you next week on Thursday, where we will be joined by Jim Weiss, Chief Risk Officer, Commercial and Executive at Crum and Forster. And also next week on Tuesday at the lab, where we will be joined by John Harmon. Thank you so much, everybody. If you want to save the chat, you can click the three dots in the top right of your chat and click Save Chat, and it will be yours to keep. See you soon. Bye, everybody.